Hello and good afternoon. It's 12 noon on Wednesday, the 11th of December 2019. My name is Anthony Haynes, registered nutritional therapist, presenting a webinar on behalf of Nutri-Link on the subject of EBV, Epstein-Barr virus, HHV6, that's human herpes virus 6, and other viruses. So, as usual, the questions and answers. If it's a short question about the topic, please do email me directly by within 2 days' time, so it's 48 hours time from right now. I'll anonymize your questions and then I'll put a Q&A document together. For those of you who are new to this webinar for the first time, I put all the questions and answers together. I'm not going to do researched answers. That takes simply too long, to be honest. But I want to give you the best answer I can for short answers. If you have a question about a case, please go and put that in the CE forum, the Clinical Education Forum. You've got the web links for that. So what are our objectives today? I'm going to overview how viral infections have already harmed human health. I'll learn about which viruses are most relevant to our clients, and look at the signs and symptoms that may manifest with certain viral infections, but that can be misleading because they may not be present. I'll be reminded about the importance of host immunity. We'll look at certain tests. There are 2 companies that I can strongly recommend for testing for the presence of viruses. We'll learn more about the direct connection of viruses to autoimmune conditions, and I'll name a few in particular that have been very well documented to have a viral connection. Also, importantly, what remedies can be used to successfully manage viral connections. We can't get rid of viruses in the same way we can bacteria, but we can put them into dormancy, and that's a huge important thing. And ultimately give us all more confidence in helping more clients, and helping more clients more effectively by helping to identify that a virus is an issue. So here's my statement. So this is from me, a quote from me. The ability to identify and or address viral infections will likely be of utmost importance for the whole of our careers, that's your careers, as nutritional and or healthcare practitioners. Just hugely relevant. So what is a virus? It's a very, very small thing. It's a small infectious agent that can replicate only in the inside of living cells and other organisms. It can infect all types of life forms, so animals, plants, microorganisms, bacteria, archaea, ticks, mosquitoes, all kinds of things. So viruses are tiny. They're found in almost every ecosystem on Earth, and they are the most abundant type of biological entity by number. They've actually been described as organisms at the edge of life because they carry genetic material, they reproduce and evolve through natural selection, but they lack a cell structure, hence they need to get inside a cell of a living organism, which is generally required for living. So it's interesting, there's a debate about whether they're a life form or not. Now, how have they affected our lives so far? Well, there have been deadly viral outbreaks. I'm going to give you an overview of some of them. They're also directly involved in cancer. When I first read about this and presented on the subject a few years ago, it was really quite an eye-opener. I was unaware of the numbers of deaths and the different types of cancers that are associated with viral infections. We may be familiar with autoimmunity, so I'll be looking at that in more detail, and particularly with glandular fever, chronic fatigue, and fibromyalgia. And there may also be complex or chronic syndromes with unknown etiology. If you've had a client with simply a challenging array of conditions, it may well be that there's a virus involved in underpinning that. So we got the impact on human health. So it's quote unquote, the emerging viral infections of the nervous system represent a major global public health concern in the 21st century. Are you aware of this? I think some of the things that I'll be sharing with you will be eye-opening. You might say, well, I kind of knew that, but some of the ways they've been described by experts in the field is really quite profound. Emerging viral infections impose substantial neurological morbidity and mortality, particularly in low and middle income regions. So it's just hugely relevant, and given the awareness of an aging population and all the news about Alzheimer's and dementia, really important to include the viral piece on that. And certainly in communication with someone who knows Dale Bredesen, the End of Alzheimer's author, and really fantastic researcher into this area, who's pioneering remarkable sort of multifactorial nutritional lifestyle and hormonal interventions to help those with early onset dementia in particular. He is including an assessment for viral burden as well. So hugely relevant. The Spanish flu is perhaps the epidemic viral infection that killed the most people. Actually struck in 1918 and 1920, so I read. It involves something called the H1N1 flu virus. It infected 500 million people, and the records actually are seeing as to how many people died as a result of it vary from 20 million to 100 million, so it's hugely diverse in terms of when I've researched the information. So 3 to 5% of the whole world's population. It's one of the most deadly natural disasters in human history, for sure. There are other conditions involve viruses that affect us. So Hep A, that's about 1.4 million annual infections. Hep B, 2 billion people across the planet are affected by Hep B. Hep C, about 180 million people worldwide are infected, with 3 to 4 million infected every year. So masses of numbers. It's actually very difficult to appreciate what that means. There are other viruses, meningitis, rotavirus, and enteroviruses, which can affect people. And the red rotavirus alone apparently kills more than 600,000 children each year in developing countries in particular. So there's just an array of different viruses that have affected us significantly. And again, it's probably likely to be the single biggest cause of death in a period of time due to the viral burden of Spanish flu. There's also this connection with cancer. You know, can you catch cancer? You know, is it infectious? So the International Agency for Research on Cancer estimates that a really staggering 1 in 5 cancer cases are caused by infection, most of those being viruses. And the burden of viral infections is completely underappreciated, which maybe with that audience we may have underappreciated too, but also by much of the cancer research community. I provided references where I can, and at the end of the slides, which I'm not going to go through, I've also provided more references for you to look at. So I want you to use these slides, which are numerous in number, as I often present. It's definitely too many slides if you like to fully grasp it. I want you to use it as a source of reference. So you've got the PDF and you can access that in due course. So the Epstein-Barr virus, as the first human tumor virus, was also known as human herpes virus 4, in case you didn't know. So HHV4. There's also HHV5 and HHV7, HHV8. We'll come on to those. And it wasn't described until 53 years after a French researcher called Roux, his initial experiments showing that viruses could lead to tumors. So Anthony Epstein, with someone called Bert Achong and Yvonne Barr, and so it's called the Epstein-Barr virus. So somehow Bert Achong got left out of that named virus description. They used something called electron microscopy in '64 to identify EBV particles in cell lines from African clients with Burkitt's lymphoma. So that's the first recognition of a virus being involved in tumors. But here are the 7 viruses that have been known to cause cancer, because it's a very, very small percentage of individuals who have Epstein-Barr virus that do have cancer, and there may well need to be a stage being set for that to be the case. So it's genetic susceptibility. So it's a very small percentage given the wide array of people that are affected by these viruses, which are the most common in the world, the herpes family. So Epstein-Barr virus, there's Hep B virus, there's the HTLV, which is the human T lymphocyte virus 1, the human papillomavirus, we're familiar with that because of the slight controversy over vaccinations and so on the subject. And there are lots of them. There are over 105, I think, of papillomaviruses, and it's particularly the HPV 16 and 18, and possibly some others that can actually lead to cancer. There's a Hep C virus and something called Kaposi sarcoma herpes virus, also known as HHV8, and also Merkel cell polyomavirus. So we've got some that we're very familiar with and some we might not have heard about before, but they can directly lead to cancer. And I'm going to recommend you have a look at this link should you wish to learn more about viruses and cancer. And here's a microscopy view of Epstein-Barr virus. I wonder how many of us here actually have EBV effectively, and whether it's active or not. So most of it's estimated that 95% of people have been affected by Epstein-Barr virus. I'm just going to start looking at the chat bar. Excuse me a second. Close that one off. Excuse me a moment. So it's extremely common, and we may have been infected in the playground at school or when we're teenagers, and it's a hugely significant factor. So I'm just going to summarize the negative impact of viral infections on human health. So it's the world's ever greatest loss of life have been attributed to viruses, and it's certainly one comment I've heard from a think tank group of people that were predicting what's going to happen in the future of mankind. Some of it's quite depressing, really. But how we're going to is it nuclear bomb? Is it nuclear radiation fallout? Is it the atmosphere around planet Earth, the ozone layer diminishing, etc., being affected by sun's radiation? And viruses headed the list of that particular thought process. So significant number of cancers affected caused by viruses, and multiple autoimmune conditions, some of which have been actually firmly established and some of which are still unknown and unrecognized, as well as chronic fatigue syndromes and complex chronic conditions as well. So again, my aim is to help to support your introduction. Some of you may be well familiar with these critters, but of course we'll never see one because they are so small, 50 times smaller than most bacteria. 50 times smaller. And so the herpes family, here are the 8 herpes family members, and they actually belong to different groups within that. And I've highlighted the Epstein-Barr virus and HHV6 in particular. They're the ones I've tested most, but I've also tested HHV3. I've actually made a mistake there on the side. It's not HHV1, it's actually HSV1. So apologies for that. And it's a herpes simplex virus 2 rather than HHV, but they might have that name too. And you can see there are 2 different types of herpes virus 6. It was originally thought to be 1, but then it's been distinguished more recently into 2 types, 6A and 6B. So we've got these herpes viruses, and what I have prepared for you is the genus on the left-hand side of the screen, what type of virus is. It's the herpes simplex family at the top, then the varicella virus, which is also HHV3, which is the chickenpox and or shingles virus. And on the right-hand side, I've described the symptoms, the sign of the symptom. This is really sort of an infection you have. You catch it and you have an infection. And we've got cytomegalovirus, and we've got lymphocryptovirus, which is actually the Epstein-Barr virus, or HHV5. And it leads to infectious mononucleosis. It's associated with Burkitt's lymphoma, which we talked about briefly, and it can lead to those symptoms of an infection. So it's fever, rash, sore throat. You take time off university, time off school, nausea, swollen lymph nodes, fatigue, weight loss, and vomiting. That's the active initial infection, but it's the chronic low-grade infection that we're more likely to be seeing. And here in herpes virus 6, typically in children, it can lead to a skin condition, a roseola condition, it's a rash, it's swollen glands as well, possible diarrhea. But really the rash is the most distinctive aspect of HHV6. But again, it's the chronic infection rather than that infection we have as a child that actually leads to a wide array of health issues. And then we have the other Kaposi's sarcoma-associated virus, HHV8. So signs and symptoms of a current sort of active infection, but those symptoms and signs, except for the fatigue, perhaps muscle aches, don't necessarily describe the nature of the chronic infection. There's ways of transmitting these viruses, and we've got the alpha herpes viruses. So that's the 1, 2, and 3, if you like, the HSV1, HSV2, and the varicella zoster. They have a relatively short reproductive cycle, have variable host range, and they efficiently destroy infected cells and establish latent infections, primarily in the sensory ganglia. A lot of the herpes family love the nervous system, which is actually related back to one of the comments I made from a previous slide, is the impact on the nervous system of these viruses is significant and shouldn't be underestimated. And hence the fact that Bredesen is actually routinely now, I believe, testing for HHV6 and other viruses, but it also can be linked with HSV1 as well in terms of the risk for dementia. Then there's the beta herpes viruses, which is the CMV and the HHV6 and HHV7. And these have long reproductive cycles and a restricted host range. The cells can enlarge if they're infected, and latency can be maintained in the white blood cells in the kidneys and secretory glands and other tissues. So these viruses, once you're infected, they remain in your body forever, and hopefully they'll be in a latent, so it's non-reproducing form, effectively in dormancy, and that's where we want them to stay. And so we begin to get the glimpse of if our immune system is compromised in some way or other, and often shock or trauma can actually lead to that, or just working through a cold, etc., which might not be that particular virus, but then weaken immunity, and then you can be hit with a post-viral fatigue syndrome afterwards. And then we have the gamma herpes viruses, which EBV is one, and HHV8, and they're specific for either T or B lymphocytes, so they have an impact directly on immune cells, and the latency is often demonstrated in lymphoid tissue. Now, the latency and something called the lytic stage, which is a reproducing form, we'll look at when we get to talk about tests for these viruses. But these, I understand there's very, very little training on viral infections. Certainly, I'm not sure there's any in terms of chronic viral infections in medical training, and very little in our formal training as well as nutritional therapists. The replication is written, the viruses occurs here, but I've got a little slideshow, a picture, not a slideshow, a picture to show you. So the virion is that bit of a virus that then effectively crosses the cell membrane, gets into the cell, and attaches itself to the DNA, and then effectively you got a cell that's been infected with the new virus. So that's just a picture of an image of how the virion, part of the virus, gets into the cell, and then effectively results in an infected cell. And as the cell life might be 30, 40 days, even a bit longer, maybe 50 days, then that cell dies, and then the virus will look to migrate to the next door cell and infect it. So it's difficult, very difficult to actually measure the actual presence of these bugs, and it's actually, there's other ways of doing it, which is measuring the immune activity to the viruses that give us an indication whether there's an active process occurring. And here is a slightly different cartoon image of the virus entering the primary infection, which is the symptoms I read to you in the previous slide, and the viral entry and replication into the beta cell. Remember that the EBV affects immune cells, and then it can be within the trap within the B cell, and it can then effectively elicit a response from T cells. And if it's latent, that's exactly where we want it to be, but it can be reactivated, and then you can see the virion part of the Epstein-Barr virus moving through the cell membrane to then affect other cells. So for a more persistent infection, it's the persistent chronic infections that we're talking about here. So latency is an ideal situation of akin to dormancy. Again, the picture of the EBV. So there are signs and symptoms of an immediate EBV infection, which you can see there. And it's a classic sort of, I've got swollen lymph glands, sore throat, rash, nausea, and fatigue and fever. But that's the immediate sort of short-term infection. There are ways of transmitting it. So it has been called the kissing disease. So in teenagers, kiss, effectively one can transmit the EBV. So it's called the kissing disease, linked with saliva. But it can also be from drinking from the same glass, even using the same toothbrush, certainly from blood, and sex and blood transfusion and organ transplants. We know there are issues with organ transplants, as highlighted by the scandal of the haemophiliac blood transfusion issue happening decades ago. HHV6, something you may have heard from me, but certainly I sort of stumbled across it and looked it up, and then discovered its super relevance, and followed researchers who've discovered it and then been researching it ever since for the last 23 plus years of HHV6. And most of us have got HHV6 within us, and hopefully they won't be causing any illnesses. And so it's the sixth member to be discovered, and symptoms certainly can occur when you're first infected, but that might be when we're a child, and it may be something that was inconsequential. But it can certainly lead to health issues, including several neurological conditions, has been referred to. So HHV6, like the other herpes viruses, can target the nervous system, and so that's your brain and spinal column and immune system, and a wide variety of organs. In one research paper, which I haven't got here, but I was in one of the many papers I've read about HHV6, fascinating situation is the researchers asked the question, I wonder where HHV6 is in the body. Have you ever asked yourself the same question? Is it in the lymph nodes? Have you got something wrong? Where is the virus? Is it in every cell? Is it in half the cells of the body? Is it in the cells in the gut? You know, where is that virus, and where is it located? And certainly we know that with herpes simplex, there can be sort of lesions that break out in the lower spine, the lower back, and that's actually where that could reside. But what they did was someone gave their body for science after dying, and they actually did a tissue analysis for all the tissues in the body, and guess where they found the HHV6? I'll tell you. They found the HHV6 in every single tissue they tested from this corpse, effectively, this fresh corpse. So just this interesting review. Where are these things? They can be all over. So they stay in your body for the whole of your life if you have a herpes virus, and usually it's in that dormant, inactive state. There's no cure for HHV6, but it does, and it doesn't cause conditions in everyone by any means. You know, otherwise the whole world would be affected. But it is something that the most prevalent viral infections are the herpes family in the world. There are links to neurological conditions, and you can see this link of a variety of conditions if HHV6 is reactivated. And that's autoimmune conditions, but particularly Hashimoto's, multiple sclerosis, Sjogren's, lupus, and this Guillain-Barré syndrome as well. But the estimation is from experts that it's actually involved in a lot more, but just hasn't been proven yet. Bone marrow suppression, certain cancers, chronic fatigue syndrome, it can really mimic Epstein-Barr virus, and the two are often found together. So it's something that I've found in virtually every client I've seen with EBV has a positive HHV6, just to share that information with you. And sometimes individuals don't have EBV but have HHV6. So they said, oh, okay, you haven't got that because you haven't got EBV, but then we discovered they got HHV6, so it has a very similar impact. Cognitive functions, colitis even, drug hypersensitivity reactions can occur, encephalitis, certain hormonal imbalances, epilepsy. There's definitely lots of research being conducted with HHV6 being involved in triggering childhood epilepsy and seizures, heart disease even, kidney disease, liver disease, lung disease, and sarcoidosis, which is an interesting autoimmune condition that I've seen a few cases of myself. So HHV6, a darn critter. HHV6B is the more common form of the virus, not the A, and apparently up to 90% of us are infected during our first 3 years. So we carry it around with us for most of our lives. And here are some initial symptoms if one has it in the short term as a child. Again, it's the chronic symptoms that I'm really more concerned about. So what lab tests are there for viruses? So I strongly recommend you considering contacting Regeneris or looking at Regeneris' website for the German lab, BCA Labs. It was previously called Infecto Labs. And there's also Armin Labs. So Professor Armin has dedicated his professional career, and he's outstanding as an individual to help us all understand the nature of infections of a variety of kind, including Lyme's, and that's via the AONM lab. So I strongly recommend you have a look at both those websites. And Armin Schwarzbach is his name, and he was involved in establishing the other German lab as well. So it's really a lot to thank him for. And do tune into the AONM information about the viral burdens. And I've used these two labs exclusively. There's no lab in the UK that has the same testing. It's extraordinary, isn't it, when you discover, oh my gosh, these things are super prevalent, have a significant role to play, and yet there's no test in the UK for them. So I have clients' blood shipped via these labs to Germany. And here's an example of a case. So this is a scleroderma. Scleroderma is a really interesting autoimmune condition, and it's essentially where the body and the skin becomes hardened like a shop dummy, so a mannequin, effectively, a mannequin. And so there's actually a methodology of assessing the degree of scleroderma to looking at how tight the skin is, because it's becoming more hard like a mannequin. It's actually a frightening condition because it can affect the whole body. It can lead to death as well. So scleroderma is quite rare to see it. So this is the test in November 2014. This client, he had a very high level. You can see the 205, if I can see my arrow on the screen, plus 205 of the ELISpot. Now, so this is introducing the ELISpot in the antibody testing. So ELISpot testing is actually a lymphocyte transformation test, LTT, as you can see on the screen, LTT, and it indicates a cellular humoral activity against Epstein-Barr virus. So it's a general immune activity rather than a specific antibody response to Epstein-Barr virus. So again, the question I was asked, and I hadn't really thought about before, was, well, what happens when the virus first affects you before you develop antibodies? What part of the immune system is going to react to that? And of course, it's the cellular activity, the humoral activity, which has that impact. So it's this is a marker of general immune activity against Epstein-Barr virus, and not looking at the antibodies. Many antibodies can be negative, effectively. So this test is actually the advanced viral profile from Regeneris Labs, our BCA Labs, and you can see a very high level. It's the highest level I've seen for a lytic reproducing Epstein-Barr virus at 205. The latent is 12, so it's quite low, but there's a very high level of Epstein-Barr virus activity. There's a small increased level in the cytomegalovirus, which is just +2, so it's only, but that's still positive. No indications of HSV1 or HSV2, but also a relatively high level of HHV6, again, IgG marker rather than IgM. I've only seen one case of positive IgM. They've all been IgG related. So absolutely categorical, a high viral burden in this individual with scleroderma. So whilst addressing a whole array of things, from identifying, supporting the leaky gut, the stress factor, environmental toxins, but also particularly addressing viruses, this individual was also involved in taking disease-modifying drugs. So there's a big case history about this, but I thought I'd show this result. And the next slide will show you the result. I think it's 4 years later. So 4 years later, so clearly a challenging condition that took many years to manifest. And here is the next result. So we can see that it's gone from 205 to 64, so still a very high level of reproducing Epstein-Barr virus, but that the latent level is less than the reference range. The cytomegalovirus is not to be seen, and the HHV6 has gone from 1 to 128, so it's actually halved effectively to go to 64 in terms of the frequency and the amount of findings that they found in the blood. So this is 4 years of treatment. Now, of course, it's teaching me about could I have done things better, and I think I know more now, and maybe we could have shortened that. But clearly, it took a long time, perseverance and understanding. So this client became very educated. I shared with him all the information I could about the nature of the condition, and he was very much engaged in it. It definitely requires a partnership and a willingness on the client to engage in such a long program. And we did a number of different retests in between time. But I thought I'd show you the sort of before and then a more recent one. And without a shadow of a doubt, the level of viral burden absolutely correlates with his condition improving. So instead of becoming a mannequin and then actually having a challenge with lungs and life itself, he actually managed to have improvements in many aspects of his physicality. So really, and the tension score on his skin was less, so really improved all around, and was actually changing trajectory. And the consultant was very interested, but only interested to observe it rather than to actually find out from the client what he was actually doing, in spite of the client's inclination to tell him effectively. So I've got another result now. So we've got varicella zoster, VZV, and this individual had fatigue and a real chronic skin issue. And if you look at the level of antibodies, I've underlined in red, orange, and the positive level is greater than 110, and they have 2,127. So 20 times above the reference range, effectively, for the varicella zoster. And again, on assessing and treating that, I'll come on to that in a moment. Very pleased to say the chronic skin issue completely resolved and the energy greatly improved. So just snapshots really of cases, but to show you that by no means is normal, because I've heard it said so many times by clients and dare I say it, medics who've talked about this. So if you've got IgG, that's historical infection, it's not a bother. Well, believe me, when there's a level above the that high above the positive range for IgG, it most certainly is. So the information that apparently is now more accepted is that if it's a certain percentage or number of times above the positive, then it certainly does represent an issue. And I remember Dr. Schwartzbach maintained, I think it was 5 times. I say think, it doesn't matter hugely, because I'm sure there will be exceptions, but sort of 5 times above the reference range will absolutely reflect a chronic ongoing infection without there being a current IgA or IgM reactivity. So varicella zoster, again, very common. Another test for an individual with chronic fatigue, you can see the Epstein-Barr virus, they just had latent, so a latent level was just mildly positive at 2, but they had HHV 6. And it's a, it was 1 to 64, and the higher the number, the greater the number of HHV 6 found in a blood sample, effectively. And HHV 6, it's remarkable. It's definitely worth more exploration than this webinar permits. And it seems that it's a bystander activator of immune activity, and it likes to be at a low level. If it engages in a full level of presence and replication, the immune system will identify and then deal with it and put it back in a dormancy, and all viruses want to survive. So it seems that the literature describes to me that these viruses like to maintain a low presence and not put their head above the parapet, as it were, to be effectively attacked by the immune system, but they have a sort of a low-grade chronic function, which can affect us in many ways. Chronic fatigue and neurological conditions, certainly with HHV 6. Here we have an individual, rather like the first result I showed you, you can see all the positives. The lytic response in this individual of the Epstein-Barr virus, the reproducing amount, is relatively low compared to 205 for the scleroderma client, but this individual faces multiple challenges of health. I mean, fatigue, brain fog, cognitive function, aches and pains, very swollen legs. There's a lot going on. What the heck is going on with the client? Run this test, and lo and behold, every single virus is coming up positive. So including the cytomegalovirus, 107, a raised level of HSV1 and HSV2. The numbers don't seem to get very high with those when there's a positive reaction, whereas with EBV and CMV, it can be very high levels, and again the HHV 6. So the whole array of herpes viruses affecting this individual, again, absolutely demanding that we support the immune system and inhibit the viral burden. Here's another example of a person with chronic skin issues. Again, I found varicella zoster often affects skin, as well as someone who had an apparent histamine intolerance, although the DAO, diamine oxidase test, was not conducted to show they had a low level, but histamine intolerance was very much fit the bill. So a wide array of symptoms, as you may be familiar with histamine intolerance, and again, a very high level of varicella zoster, 1,261 So again, over 10 times the reference range for IgG. This individual also, their skin conditions responded very well to the inhibition of the varicella zoster. These two cases, in fact, with the first case I discovered with a skin rash and chronic skin issues, varicella zoster came out, tested it. I think that was the first case I showed you. And then it's interesting how many other cases have come in with skin issues, and it's actually been varicella zoster. So do make a mental note and written note that if you have someone coming in with skin issues, I'm not really talking about psoriasis or eczema, but it could be involved in those too, then do consider the varicella zoster. And varicella zoster is tested conducted by the Armin labs. I'm not aware that the Regeneris profile from BCA labs actually includes the varicella zoster. So skin conditions and varicella zoster have been associated. So as we move on, we are effectively halfway through in time. So thank you very much for your attention. You can see that viruses, they have a massive impact on human health, way more perhaps prevalent than the average individual might know, or doctors or medicine, even the researchers in the fields understand. There are now accurate ways of testing these viruses, and it's not just the antibody, but this lymphocyte transformation test, the ELISpot testing. Again, difficult for me to know who you are and how many tests you've conducted already, but for those of you who are new to viruses, I really recommend that you consider the information I present here and consider whether that's relevant for your client, and then engage in some testing to rule these things out. They're not going to go away on their own, that's for sure. So viruses and autoimmunity. So we know that autoimmunity is caused by a number of different things in general, and there are sort of 3+1 things that need to be present according to the individuals who are most familiar with the autoimmunologists in the world. And Yehuda Schoenfeld is the godfather of autoimmunology, and he describes, as does Alex Vasquez, the notion that we need to be genetically susceptible to have an autoimmune condition. And that's true, but the genetic component is often a much smaller aspect of why they've got the condition than the numbers of people who have the condition. The barrier permeability, so leaky gut, but also can affect the blood-brain barrier as well as the lungs too. So barrier permeability, and then you need environmental trigger. So it could be food reactivity, it could be toxins, or it could be infections. So I emboldened that word infections, could be viruses, and often there needs to be, or there is often accompanying the etiology of autoimmunity, as you may well know, is the chronic stress or acute trauma. How many people in our case histories of I had a car crash, or I had this unbelievable sort of emotional shock or relationship issue that was traumatic, or my child got ill or got hurt, and then they've never been the same since. And that was sort of the initiation of what we might call the reactivation, perhaps of a virus that was already within us, or perhaps diminished our detox capacity, toxins stored in the body as well. So these things are present, and infection is absolutely one of the factors that can drive autoimmunity. Lots of research on the subject. This is a study in 97, so 22 years ago, molecular mimicry and T-cell mediated autoimmune disease, and basically their conclusion was that the pathogenesis of autoimmunity may well be linked to infectious agents. And here are some more references linking the viral infections with autoimmunity, which have been long linked in the literature. It's certainly nothing that I was taught about when I was studying in 1990, and then been studying it since. No one has actually really engaged in a formal process of education. I've had to find out through all the papers. So it's something that's been there in the literature, but not often in formal education settings. And certainly the viral infections can affect autoimmunity by either having molecular mimicry, so the immune system thinks that the part of the body is like a virus, or virus is like a part of the body, and it attacks the virus and then attacks the part of the body that looks very similar, has a similar amino acid sequence. And it seems that with peptides, it can be hundreds of, well, 50 amino acids, but proteins can be hundreds of amino acids in length. Peptides can be about 50 amino acids in length, and you've got shorter protein chunks, effectively, and it just takes 6 amino acids in sequence, just 6 in sequence, to be similar to a tissue for there to be the potential development of molecular mimicry, i.e. the immune system fails to recognize that those 6 amino acids were actually part of us and shouldn't be attacked. But if they belong in part of a virus, there's 6 amino acids, then there can be an attack on our own tissue. So fascinating sort of notion that the body's immune system can be so flawed, because there are so many conditions of autoimmunity now that are linked with molecular mimicry, but also it can be bystander activation, and that's what HHV6 can particularly prompt. And again, it's viral persistence really, which can affect who knows what percentage of cells in the body, and that's something that I still don't know, but I understand from some research that it could be up to 50% of cells or more could be affected by the presence of a chronic virus. So you've got references there with the web links for you to go and explore some of those papers. Again, more papers here. And this is the quote from the famous and brilliant Dr. Aristo Vojdani, the immunoscience labs director and functional medicine laboratory worker, also works with Datis Karagian, a number of different projects. He maintained on his website, and actually I've spoken to him directly verbally about this, and as soon as I started talking about HHV6 and autoimmunity, he was starting to nod. Yeah, he's fully aware of it. And he pointed me to his front page of his website where I got this quote from. Viruses, in particular HHV6, are some of the major contributing factors in autoimmunity, quote unquote. And some more information linking Epstein-Barr virus to autoimmunity, some references there. The other references at the end of this slideshow, again, so lots and lots of literature for you to look at. And the autoimmune conditions, although there are probably 80 plus that are formally recognized names of autoimmunity, and there may be up to 200 other conditions in total that may have an autoimmune link with them, including heart disease, in fact. But these particular limited autoimmune conditions, which of course affect millions of people, are directly associated with having had a virus involved in the etiology. So Hashimoto is the most common autoimmune condition in the world, where you end up with raised levels of antibodies to TPO or thyroglobulin, thyroperoxidase, or thyroglobulin. That can be driven by Epstein-Barr virus and HHV6. Graves' disease, the hyperthyroid state, similarly. Lupus, which is again a multifactorial sort of pleiotropic type of autoimmune condition, and I found that most clients who have lupus have on the advanced viral panel, they have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 viral issues, if not hidden bacterial issues as well. So it's lupus, I would say that you've probably got more chance of having more bugs, more viruses involved than any of the others on this particular screen. Multiple sclerosis is something I've focused on an awful lot, and wish I could have done more for some clients in the past as well. The more you learn, you think, gosh, there's so much to learn. And fascinating information about multiple sclerosis. It's estimated on this particular topic, and it's something that is, again, it's affecting the nervous system. Because herpes viruses have an affinity for the nervous system. It's estimated by one of the world's leading experts on multiple sclerosis that 25% of the condition is a genetic thing. As they say, well, it's 25% gene related, genetic related, but by no means does everyone with that gene profile end up with multiple sclerosis. So he estimates that 75% are environmental and modifiable lifestyle diet related. And so there's an awful lot you can do to influence the progression of the condition. But and he also refers to HHV6 and EBV, and his name is Professor George Jelinek. I wrote the name down, George Jelinek, who is Australian and has conducted lots of work and written some books on multiple sclerosis. So very relevant. And every individual case that I've seen with multiple sclerosis where I've tested has at least one bug present, an EBV, HHV6, and a bacteria that's a very small bacteria, so it's akin to a virus in terms of its size, Chlamydia pneumoniae, which I refer to as CP. There's also Mycoplasma pneumoniae, may be present too. So bugs being present and then inhibiting those is the whole point of, if you like, on this presentation. But the whole point in understanding this is we can inhibit the viral burden and then make a difference to what the immune system is doing in terms of attacking self. The sarcoidosis, which is affecting the lungs, certainly may be influencing vitamin D metabolism too. So don't give vitamin D unless you see they're low. I've had some clients recover nicely, having been labeled with that. So a lot of these conditions may actually be sort of, well, we don't know what it is, but we're going to call it lupus or we're going to call it sarcoidosis. So they're not necessarily super definitive diagnoses, but sarcoidosis is absolutely affecting the lung and lung function and can be a significant challenge to health. And I found that individuals have viruses and bacteria infections in that as well. And by inhibiting the CP and the HHV6 in a couple of cases of sarcoidosis, there's been really remarkable improvements in their condition. Scleroderma, I've shown you one case with that. Type 1 diabetes, the only autoimmune condition, I think, that where men and males outnumber females. Otherwise, females bear the brunt of autoimmunity in many cases, up to 7 to 1, 8 to 1 in certain conditions like RA, for example. And then there's erythema multiforme major and thrombocytopenia, which also can be linked to certain bacteria, including H. pylori. So yes, lots of information shared with you about this slide, but this is where strong evidence exists to have an association between a virus and autoimmunity. And this is taken from Dr. Ari Vojdana's website about certain conditions on the left, and then the presence of certain viruses with the one cross indicates an association, and 2 crosses or pluses indicates a strong association, effectively. So you can see the link between them. It doesn't mean to say that you won't find the other things like scleroderma. We found Epstein-Barr virus in that one client to be very, very high and very prevalent. So this is just an indication, but you can find all these kind of viruses in a wide array of conditions. So it's not limited to these by any means. And notice on the right-hand side the measles issue. And again, testing for measles. So trying to find a lab that tests for measles, and it's not something that's commonly done, which is again interesting. Now we know that Epstein-Barr virus is associated with chronic fatigue, and there's lots of information about that. But also, it seems that HHV6 is commonly present as well with that label. Myalgic encephalomyelitis is really inflammation of the brain, and that may be linked with certain polioviruses that may not be EBV or HHV6. So chronic fatigue syndrome, I think, is a good description, and I think those that I would almost always consider EBV and HHV6 and have that panel done with individuals with that condition. Client just yesterday in town on my clinic day, affected when she was 64 years old. So she had full chronic fatigue for 4 years and had a trauma effectively, and then hasn't recovered since, and has all the symptoms of chronic fatigue with exercise intolerance and under-refreshing sleep and feeling extraordinarily tired. So whilst had a lot going on in her life, it was actually the trauma of a surgery. And after that, she's never been the same since. So we're actually going to conduct that test for her. Then we come on to the what to do about it. Remedies that may be successful to resolve viral infections. So that's not getting rid of viral infections, but inhibiting them, affecting the viral burden, putting them into latency and dormancy. So I've got a list of remedies and nutrients that have been shown in various different literature to inhibit the viruses. And I've emboldened the ones I was talking about specifically. So the Humic Acid, olive leaf, and you can Monolauric Acid, lysine, licorice root, Takuna, and there are other agents to consider, natural herbal extracts, astragalus, garlic, even, which is more associated with inhibiting bacteria, zinc, vital for immunity, selenium has a useful antiviral effect, NAC, and we'll talk about the benefits of that, and vitamin E as well. So not an all-inclusive list, but a list of remedies and nutrients that can inhibit viruses. Humic acid, you may have heard me talk about this before in other presentations I've given. It's absolutely fascinating, and I would recommend you read, I think, 3 articles on our website, which you've got the link for there on this slide. And I flew to Newport Beach in California to have an interview with Dr. Richard Laub some years ago. And he's a professor of chemistry from 2 universities, I think it was Ohio and San Diego. And he left that job when he was 50 in San Diego as a professor of chemistry to set up a business, and I met him when he was 71. So 21 years in, he was the major supplier of humic acid in America, supplying supplement companies and other agencies with humic acid. And it's fascinating to learn that only 1% of the humic acid he produced from the Southern California source actually went into supplements, and 99% went to a different source, and I'll share what that is. Stunningly, and rather completely unrelated to today, he found that humic acid is used as a very, very effective mining drill bit lubricant, and so it's actually sort of jet streamed onto the edge onto a drill bit, so that mining companies can preserve their precious drill bits to get through the rock, and so they don't overheat, etc. So humic acid is a drill bit lubricant and coolant, fascinatingly, but 1% comes into supplements. And Allergy Research had the fortune of discovering his work and incorporating his particular humic acid, and he found the most effective source in the world. So humic acid is different wherever you get it from, and that makes a significant difference. And he showed me in his own lab, he does chemistry experiments and has written out about the nature of the antiviral effects of humic acid. So they're not all the same by any means. And humic acid he found is the most effective antiviral when it's coming from freshwater plants. So freshwater plants effectively is composted down to the Earth's crust, certain numbers of feet and meters down. That has the most effective antiviral activity. Otherwise, humic acid can be found in other coal mines where they've actually dug deep, and part way down you go sideways into the crust and you can find this ancient compost effectively. But if those plant material that's been squished into peat and bog and compost has not been surrounded by fresh water, it's not freshwater plants, or maybe then the antiviral activity is considerably less. So again, really interesting. And so here's the slide about the virus replication again. It seems that humic acid binds onto the virion like a Velcro effect. It actually directly stops the virion from penetrating the next door cell. So I'm showing this slide to give you an image of that. I haven't got humic acid doing that, but it stops the virion from getting to the next door cell. So it's an anti-Velcro effect and has a greater affinity for the virion than the virion has to go to the next door cell. So that's essentially how humic acid works. It doesn't go into the cell to deal with the virus, and whereas other antivirals may do just that. They may have a target the viral material themselves. So it's a very effective agent, and I found it to be useful in a whole array of conditions, and I often used it with something else as well. So I've almost never used it on its own, to be honest, as the only agent I would use for someone with a chronic viral infection. I use it with other. There's no known tolerance to humic acid by viruses, and studies have shown that if a host cell is penetrated before the introduction of humic acid, the reproduction process is not halted. So again, the humic acid doesn't go inside the cell, and it won't therefore stop the reproductive process of virus within the cell. But after it reproduces, the host cell releases the new viruses into the bloodstream, and that's when the humic acid can bind onto it. So humic acid plus another antiviral agent is often what I would consider for viruses, and I would certainly consider olive leaf extract, which contains a variety of different plant substances, phenolic constituents, and squalene. And you got the names of so it's oleuropein, which is what gives extra virgin olive oil its bitter, pungent taste. And it belongs to a certain family, which are abundant in certain plants, and so they're called iridoids and saccharidoids, and they're compounds that are used glycosidically, so bind to the sugar of the construct of a virus, and they're produced from the secondary metabolism of terpenes as precursors of various indole alkaloids. So lots of words there to the chemistry, but olive leaf extract has a well-documented effects in health, and you can see one of them is its antiviral effect. Now, Dana Flavin, MD, an innovative doctor, has successfully treated Epstein-Barr virus for a life-threatening enlargement of the liver and spleen that occurs in severe cases. So this is not something we're going to get to see in clinical practice, and it's and the Dr. Flavin published a paper called "Reversing Splenomegaly when the spleen becomes enlarged in Epstein-Barr virus infected children." So again, we're not going to come across this, but there's a point of principle here is that in young adults and children, over 50 patients treated with a combination therapy that I'm going to show you, it was successful in showing a dramatic improvement within 24 hours with successful remission of the disease and complete reversal of the splenomegaly. So really quite profoundly effective, and for an active infection. So one can consider this approach for chronic infection. We could potentially use lower doses, but again, it's something to show that something that's absolutely been shown to be effective. And I'm just going to look, so before I go on to what that protocol was, here's an image of the balance of the immune system. We got Th0, so balanced immune cells, and then we've got Th1 and Th2 aspects of immunity. And you can see that interferon gamma is one of the immune cells that's most associated with a Th1 response, linked with autoimmunity, but also vitally for helping to deal with matters within the cell. So intracellular infections, viruses and bacteria, you need interferon gamma to help to address that aspect. And whilst autoimmunity is associated with a Th1 dominance, we also need interferon gamma to deal with the intracellular infections and bacteria that may actually have instigated or driven the autoimmune condition. Whereas Th2, it's got more to do with the antibody production and allergies and against the antibody response. So we're not looking to increase that particularly in terms of dealing with viruses. So introduce you to interferon gamma 1, and I'll show the relevance of that when I look at the next information that Dr. Flavin was using. So here's information about the reason why Epstein-Barr virus has a negative impact on health. And it's got a lot to do with the development and generation of reactive oxygen species, so free radicals. And they're a product from a combination of oxygen radicals from xanthine oxidase. You may be familiar with that. It's involved in gout and uric acid metabolism, and it requires certain nutrients. I believe molybdenum is required for that particular enzyme. And the combination of, and there we go, I'm just going to switch it off. excuse me, someone in the office didn't know I was giving a webinar, and it seems that this xanthine oxidase is elevated in blood patients with EBV and Hep B 200 times above normal levels. So by understanding the basic pathology described in the slide and the molecular biology of viral diseases, it's now been shown as to how to inhibit the toxicity of the disease while simultaneously increasing the immune defense to stop the viral replication. So note the increasing immune defense, I refer to interferon gamma. So I'm going to move on perhaps past these slides, but essentially the nutrients that I'm going to show you now from Dr. Flavin's protocol resulted in a rapid return to health in 24 to 48 hours. So really remarkably beneficial and swift benefits. And Dr. Flavin used licorice root, zinc, selenium, NAC, and vitamin E, as I'll show you in this slide here. So anti-Epstein-Barr virus, again, we're talking about acute situation, which we're not going to see in our own practices, but it's a point of principle. How do we deal with EBV and other herpes viruses? The licorice root increases interferon gamma and it also helps to decrease the xanthine oxidase activity. So very effective in licorice root. Now, licorice root needs to contain the glyceric acid, and it's just 3 times a day, and it does inhibit an enzyme that raises cortisol effectively. It actually inhibits an enzyme that would catabolize cortisol. So by inhibiting the enzyme, it means whatever cortisol is there is kept there for longer. So licorice root is a means of raising cortisol without stimulating or taxing the adrenal glands. And it's also a very, very useful antiviral agent. How did we know this? So it's, but something to be aware of is not looking to raise cortisol, and potentially blood pressure needs to be measured when everyone's taking licorice. But again, this was a very short-term use, but a smaller dosing, and again, taking it in the morning particularly. So not this protocol, but when we're considering it for our clients with a chronic EBV or HHV6 or other viral issue, we'll be taking it in the morning only to support cortisol levels, the rhythm, the high levels in the morning, to improve interferon gamma. So to direct our own innate defenses against viruses. NAC, a well-documented amino acid that supports glutathione, looking at 3 times a day. It binds nitric oxide, so maybe where the NAC can be used for chronic fatigue syndrome for the no cycle. It increases lymphocyte movements and reverses this splenomegaly and increases the Th1 lymphocytes, which has an antiviral effect. So NAC and licorice root support the Th1 response, which inhibits viruses. So again, another use for NAC, if we didn't already know that. And it's interesting, in methionine may also be something to consider, but I haven't used that myself, whereas I have used licorice and NAC in clinical practice since I've learned this information. Zinc, we know it supports the interferon tenfold, and again, short-term use of that level of zinc, 40 to 60 milligrams, short-term only. Typically wouldn't use more than 25 milligrams a day on an ongoing basis without checking, and the implications on immune health and copper and manganese levels as well, and potentially iron. But for short-term use, again, zinc, very, very useful. Vitamin E decreases the NF-kappa B, the inflammation, so it decreases that activity to decrease viral replication. So inflammation increases viral replication, and vitamin E and also tocotrienols too help protect the lipid membrane and reduce NF-kappa B inflammation. So again, anti-inflammatory approaches too. Vitamin C also decreases NF-kappa B activity and protects the hydrophilic membrane if it's a water-soluble form, and also fat-soluble forms of vitamin C, which can also protect the cell lipid membrane and also help to recycle glutathione too. And then lastly is sodium selenite, a particular form of selenium salt, and it has direct antiviral activity and also can help reduce peroxide products via its glutathione levels. So selenium is a vital mineral for glutathione, as you probably know. So again, really, really fantastic to get this insight into the efficacy of a really potently useful protocol. Certainly used for longer term, certainly consider lower doses of certainly the licorice and possibly the NAC, and lower doses of zinc over time. But really a very, very useful to get some great information about a specific readily available source of nutrients to deal with EBV and HHV6. They weren't even using humic acid or olive leaf either, but those could be considered to add to the mix. So NAC upregulates the interferon gamma. I'll move on past that to move on to, so here's more information about interferon gamma, so I'm moving on. So I'm going to talk to you briefly about some other nutrients. Lysine, you may well be familiar with. In fact, it's also got a nickname called herpes killer, and it really refers to herpes simplex virus 1. And the well-controlled studies show that you need a certain dose of lysine to have a benefit. It seems that 0.62 grams per day or less than that didn't really have an effect, whereas higher doses did. And I've had many clients take 1 to 2 grams of lysine to inhibit the expression of their herpes simplex virus 1, can help with herpes simplex virus 2 too. Monolauric acid, you may be familiar with the name of this. It's a fatty acid, effectively, and it's been found to be an effective antiviral. It's a natural virucidal and bactericidal, and there's a review of it via this link on the natural monograph via that PDF. So do have a look at that. It has antimicrobial factors, and it's been recognized for over 3 decades now by a relatively small number of researchers, but they've had quite a number of papers published on it. So it's a non-toxic agent, generally regarded as safe, and is a very useful antiviral, anti-bug agent. And Dr. Kabara spent some time researching this, and he's found that it's fascinating that there's an anti-infective action of lipids and the structure of those lipids, so i.e. free fatty acids of monoglycerides. And monoglycerides are the active ones, and then you've got the diglycerides and triglycerides are inactive. So of the saturated fats, the lauric acid has greater antiviral activity than either caprylic acid, which you know as an antifungal as well. And so that's where the lauric acid can become useful. So more information about lauric acid too. So I've used monolauric acid to inhibit alongside humic acid. In fact, there's a humic acid with monolauric acid supplement. I've often used them both together actually, so we get a higher dose of humic acid as well as the monolauric. And here are some viruses that have been found to be inhibited by the monolauric, which actually is active against what's called enveloped DNA and RNA viruses, but not all viruses are enveloped effectively. So technical details there, but you can see it's HHV1 and HHV2, but it's not effective against these viruses, Epstein-Barr virus and other viruses too. So it's not effective against all viruses. So it's worthy of note. So that's why I don't use monolauric with all cases and use this as a checklist. But so really, it has been shown that monolauric is effective against EBV and HHV1 and 2, but not HHV6. And then Takuna tincture. This webinar will not be complete without reference to Takuna tincture. Because it's something that's effective against HHV6. It's from a bark of a tree called Cecropia trigosa from South America, and has very powerful antiviral properties. And I found it to be probably one of the most effective agents to directly inhibit HHV6. So much so that it can be a Herpes response. And I looked to titrate the dose from 1 or 2 drops a day to 1 or 2 drops a few times a day, and build it up very nice and slowly. And when I found many individuals, when they increase it by 1 drop, just 1 drop, they get some more Herpes symptoms. So this one needs to be taken care of. So in the background, one can be engaged with humic acid and olive leaf extract, and then introduce the Takuna tincture, which is a Nutri-Medics product. So here's the list of those products that referred to from Dr. Flavin's protocol, and those that I found to be extensively effective. The humic acid and the olive leaf extract, but also in combination with the licorice and the vitamin E, which could be also tocotrienols, not just vitamin E itself, and the NAC can be a very, very effective combination to support an individual to inhibit their viral burden. So those remedies there. So it's hope this information will be useful. You can refer back to it. So remedies that may inhibit viruses is hugely relevant. Things that I use in clinical practice, like almost all the time. It's about selecting which ones you're going to use for which individual. I wouldn't suggest using all of them by any means, but selective use, and beware of using Takuna too fast, because it can result in a Herpes, but it only results in a Herpes when an individual has a viral issue. It says on the bottle 30 drops per day, but I would never start on that dose, and rarely have I got up that far. I think if you or I were fit and well, we don't have a viral issue, we could maybe swallow 30 or 60 drops and have no impact whatsoever. But with those individuals with an HHV6 in particular, I found the Takuna to be particularly useful. So in summary, and again, really appreciate your time out listening to this, and I hope you found it useful, and you will find it useful in due course as a point of reference. We're aware that viruses have actually caused the death of millions of people. They are potentially involved in 1/5 of cancers, and they contribute to many autoimmune conditions, some of which has been well documented, well associated, and others are yet to be proven per se. Definitely contribute to chronic fatigue syndrome and many other varied chronic conditions. And they are magnified by 21st century lifestyle and environment, and particularly thanks to Dietrich Klinghart's work, and he maintains that electromagnetic frequencies, EMFs, directly promotes the impact and activity of viruses and helps to reactivate them. So again, we need to be careful of all environmental factors. So fascinating link between EMFs and viral issues as well. And some viruses are more relevant to our clients than others. So I maintain that EBV and HHV are super relevant. And almost always when I test an individual, where an individual client is a candidate for having these, when I test them, it's almost always positive. And when we inhibit them, perhaps most importantly of all, individuals have an improved outcome. So I can see you've asked some questions. I want you to send those questions to me on email if you could. So please, thank you very much for asking the questions. I can't answer them right now. If you could please send them to me on the email, I'll either include them in the Q&A or I'll indicate that you need to put that case on the CE forum. So thank you very much indeed for those. Apologies for not answering them right now. And be aware that the signs and symptoms from viral infections where you've caught an infection fresh may be more extensive and varied than the classic ones. So let me rephrase that. If you catch a HHV6 and we have a roseola, we have a rash, we have EBV, we have swollen glands, we have some symptoms, we take to the bed, we rest, we recover. Those are limited symptoms, but those viral infections, when reactivated and become chronic, possible but with bystander activation, can result in a wide array of conditions, autoimmunity and neurological conditions particularly. And that's an area that is going to come more and more to the fore. And we can now test for and identify viral infections much more accurately than before. And again, fascinatingly, no tests in the UK, no lab actually measures for these things as accurately as the German labs. And it's particularly useful looking at the LTT, the lymphocyte transformation test, or the ELISpot testing, as well as the antibody testing. And very often I found the antibodies are negative and the ELISpot levels are positive, showing that so again, you can say, well, no, you haven't got that, says the IgG test, but in fact you then discover that they actually do have an issue with it because the ELISpot test is raised. So it's vital we need to support the innate immune response, and that's what the licorice and the NAC, we've learned about those two agents today, quite apart from all other, vitamin E too for cell membrane integrity, and reducing inflammation can play a key role. And we know that stress and trauma can definitely lower immunity and allow these viruses to become reactivated. So I really hope that's been something of interest to you. It's certainly relevance in my opinion, and I believe you all now have more means, more confidence and more means to successfully address viral infections. We can't cure them, but we can certainly inhibit the viral burden and then allow the immune system to become stronger and therefore improve our clients' health. So thank you so much for listening. This is the end. I'd like to remind you, please send me questions directly to my email, and including the ones that you posted on the chat box today to me, and I'll answer those questions as soon as I can, probably next week. And if you've got a case history which is involving some viral tests or question marks about that, please post it on the CE forum. Now the slides coming up after this one are scientific evidence linking viruses to autoimmunity, and you can see as I flip through these that you're getting nausea, that you can see that there's lots of information there which I provided. So it's a handful of slides with densely populated with references that associate viruses with ill health. So our time is up. I'd like to thank you so much for attending. It's a pleasure to be with you. I know some of you obviously in person, I know some of you are friends and so on. So thank you so much for joining us for another Nutri-Link webinar. We look forward to seeing you in the new year, where I'll be presenting on a wide array of fascinating subjects, including intermittent fasting, as well as sports nutrition and fertility in the early part of next year. And we'll be running one every month after that. Thank you so much. Feedback is very welcome. Love to know what we could do better. So do email me that. Really, no question is a silly question. No question is too small to ask if you have it. And I'll put it in the Q&A and I will anonymize those questions. So I'd like to wish you all a fantastic Christmas and wish you good health and look forward to our next encounter. So farewell for now. Bye.